Hello and welcome to today's Career Month webinar program. My name is Adam Sylvain and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled Building Your Brand on Social Media. Today we will hear from alumna Mariah Garcia. Mariah has consulted for more than 150 nonprofits and small businesses since 2015, helping them to be massively effective on social media while working with limited resources. In 2019, she joined Lincoln Deployed, a former client, to help build modern tech solutions and brands for government and policy officials. She lives in Cicero, Illinois, with her fellow UChicago alumnus husband, their toddler, and 2 dogs. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to cede the floor to Mariah.
Hey everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to give this presentation for my fellow alum. We are starting off just talking about building your brand, and I have very purposely made building your brand very big on this slide and the 5 shifts about social media small, because the very first thing I want to make sure we're all on the same page about is that social media is a tool. You need to build your brand for whatever your goals are, but the social media is only as good as how you are using it to actually meet those goals. I'm not the type that's like, well, you need to be on all social media, you need to do so much social media in order to meet your goals, only if it actually serves your career and business goals. So go ahead, Adam. I've prepared this presentation particularly with people in mind who are doing their own social media marketing for a small business, or if you're trying to build a personal brand. But what I wanted to do before we get further into this is have a better idea of who all has shown up today and where you are at as far as using social media for your goals. And then while we go through the presentation, I'll try to cater a bit more toward who is here with us today. So we have a quick little poll that we'd like to run. So what would best describe your social media goals here? And I've given 3. Now, maybe you don't fit perfectly in one of these categories, but it gives me a little bit of a better perspective of what kind of examples will be most effective to help you guys understand these concepts and make sure that this is the most effective presentation as it can be for you guys.
So we do have some responses coming in. I'll give folks just a few more seconds to register their response and choose one of those 3 options, and then I'll share out the results.
Okay,
so it looks
great.
like so the 68% that would like to position themselves as thought leaders, 29% that would like to grow their business, and 3% that are looking to get donations and support for nonprofits.
Okay, great. That's super helpful. And then I will try to put things a bit more in terms of that. A lot of my examples in here are from working with nonprofits and small businesses, but it's really helpful to know that there's so many people wanting to be more of the thought leader, and the approach is maybe a little bit different for some of those. So I'll make sure to touch on that while we go through. So Adam, if we could go to the next slide. I bet that no matter which of those 3 answers you had or where you are on in your use of social media for your career goals, that one of these next 3 memes probably sounds like you or your experience. Go ahead, the next one. So some of you may have experienced this, where you have someone advising you that you need to use social media or to get likes on Facebook, and that then you'll be able to sell things. Or if you get just more followers, that then you will be a thought leader, or just focusing on pure numbers of just reaching as many people as possible in order to sell something or position yourself as that thought leader. And the reality doesn't quite add up to that, because Facebook likes don't pay your bills. They don't always get you that next promotion you wanted or that job you wanted, and that's just the reality. So that's the first feeling that I hear a lot of people have when they've been trying to use social media to meet their career goals. Next one. The other is the type that researches a lot, and especially I think probably you Chicago alum are even worse about this, is that they research a ton and then never quite get to implementing the advice that they learned about how to position themselves on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever they're working to, further their career goals. Next one. And then the other thing that a lot of people run into is the overthinking, probably also a pretty typical U Chicago alum issue, is that it's not so simple as just posting on social media to build your career and be that thought leader, because wouldn't you know, you spend 45 minutes creating one post, and if you do that every time, man, oh man, it's really hard to be consistent because who's got time for that? Next slide. So all of those issues are actually not just U Chicago alum issues, but I think we're probably worse about it. But I've seen it across all sorts of nonprofit leaders, thought leaders, and small business owners. And the real issue is some shifts in how we approach social media as part of our career building maneuvering. And this presentation is going to focus mainly on those larger shifts, and in there I'll have some more very practical ways to think about them, but they're the more overarching ways that you can make sure that you are actually being effective on social media for your career goals. Okay, next. So once you make these shifts, it will make it a lot easier to build your business and your career and to actually do it efficiently. I know a lot of us are dealing with multiple things that we're juggling, and positioning yourself as a thought leader or expanding your business, those sorts of things, they always tend to be the last on that list. But if we do it more efficiently, we're able to actually tackle it. And you may have the potential of actually enjoying doing it, which I know for some doesn't sound like a possibility, but when we talk about this some more, I think I'll be able to convince you. Okay, next slide. So a quick thing, go ahead and you can just make both bullets show. So I actually started out in social media by not doing it very well. And this is, I think, the most important qualification for my giving this presentation, is that I started off in my very first job at the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago, working in education. And my very first week on my very first real full-time job, we were sitting in a room and someone asked, who's going to take over social media for the museum? And everyone looked at me. And it was because I was the only one in the room who didn't have gray hair. And so I felt like my age was basically my best qualification for this. And honestly, at the time, I felt like that was a great, qualification for it as well. And so we did social media okay for the first 2 years. We didn't do terrible. It just was But then I became obsessed with learning as much as I could about social media strategy, marketing strategy, and all those things. And over the following 2 years, we were able to quadruple the number of people coming to the museum for our programs. And so that spurred this interest and this passion for consulting for other businesses and organizations. By this point, it's over 150 that I have actually helped to get those same kind of results for them, especially while dealing with having life and perhaps a whole other difficult career that's taking up a ton of your time, and also trying to position yourself as a thought leader or to market that business on top of running the business. So that's kind of this perspective that I'm coming from when I think about these shifts. So next slide. That's really how I discovered these shifts, was by force, by learning the hard way, being practical and finding the most efficient way to do this, and the way that would be most compatible with also actually being in a career or actually having another full-time job, all of those competing things for my time, and also managing a personal brand or building a business. So the very first shift that we'll talk about today, is the next slide, is to know your starving crowd. And what I mean by this is that every single one of you, whatever career you are in, whether you are in the thought leader positioning, whether you are running a financial business, whether you are running a gym, whether you're running a laundromat, you have some starving crowd. And that is who you should be focused on. It is the person that you need to think about when you are publishing anything on social media. A lot of times, especially in the thought leader realm, we tend to focus on like, well, how can I write something or write a post that will show that I know so much, or that I just am so expert in my field. And what this is shifting toward thinking about, who am I actually writing for? Am I teaching someone? Who exactly is this starving crowd who needs to know this information and know how to present it, that sort of thing. Next slide is actually just to really, really know your starving crowd. And next slide is showing what that really means. So the most typical objection I get from people when I come to them for a small business owner, say, is that they have the most amazing product in the world. Of course, every business owner feels that deeply. And so when asked, well, who is your product for? Who are you selling it to? The answer is usually everyone. Everyone needs my product. And that's simply not the truth. And even if it is something that a wide variety of people want, if you start to speak to everyone, then you're really speaking to no one. As a thought leader, if you want to speak to other people in your field, you're going to be speaking very differently than if you're also trying to teach that subject matter to somebody who's outside of the field. And so you have to keep that in mind wherever you are. Is you want to be that consistent voice in speaking to a very specific person. And the second is that it's focused on that person, that starving crowd. What outcomes are you going to give them through your product, through your blog post, through the discussion you create on LinkedIn? What kind of outcome are you going to bring to that person? And it's really about shifting it from what you're trying to get out of it to that person. And it's also not just about knowing their demographics. Oh, this person is a PhD in such and such field. Oh, this person is a 30-year-old woman living in Florida with 3 children. It's actually knowing about what makes that person tick. It's about knowing what keeps that person up at night that they're worried about. It's about knowing what kind of shows they watch or that they don't watch, what books they're reading. It's knowing so much more about them and then leveraging that to relate to people. And even as a thought leader, being someone who is relatable is still very important. And that is a differentiator, because it's the difference between just being someone who is able to use a lot of jargon or being someone who actually is leading people through what they're writing. Next slide. So here's an example from one of my clients that I've had in the past. The difference between understanding your starving crowd versus just kind of thinking about people who generally might be interested in your subject. So Sharon Tash is owner of Tash Fitness. She's up in Skokie, and she owns this gym that she originally was working with some social media experts on this, and they started to build out this brand that uses things like hashtag #GymRat to try and get people to be interested in her gym and to look at her images, and typical kind of gym jargon like feel the burn, sweat angel, all those sorts of things. So that's true. Sharon Tash owns a gym and people tend to sweat there. And, hashtag #GymRat sounds kind of interesting or whatever, or baller or whatever. But Sharon Tash clientele, her starving crowd, are actually women who are plus sized and having a community where they could come to a gym, feel comfortable, support each other, and have like kinds of goals. They're not aiming for a six-pack abs. They're aiming for general health and mental health and all of that. And so shifting from just generally like, oh, people who like gyms, we'll just use every hashtag we can think of. We'll talk about feeling the burn and all that. And of course, Sharon Tash being into fitness herself and the owner, her tendency is she is obsessed with gyms, but her clientele, the people she's aiming for, are actually gym adverse. They're bold and beautiful. They're people who want this community. They want to have a gym where they can go and not feel weird or guilty while there's people walking around in sports bras with six-pack abs and just feeling weird about it. This is a place they can go to be with those sorts of people. So that's just an example, and I think that kind of example does apply across all kinds of businesses, especially expert fields. If you are a thought leader, but you are, for instance, trying to talk to someone outside of your expert field. So thinking if you serve a different audience than is your actual, equivalent in your degree or in your field, then you need to make sure you're stepping out of your language, your jargon, your way of thinking of things, and thinking about that starving crowd you're actually trying to reach. Next slide. The second shift is to actually have a strategy. So a lot of times we get into this and we know we have to do social media because a bunch of people said if you want to be a thought leader, you've got to be posting on LinkedIn every day, or you've got to be having a very serious Instagram if you have this kind of business. And realistically, we need to have an actual goal in mind, because how would we know when we've actually achieved our goal if we don't even have one, right? Next slide. You can skip the next slide. So the reality is, whether you're a thought leader, whether you are a business owner, whether you have nonprofit types of goals, if you don't have a plan, you will be wasting your time. That's the reality. And I know it takes work to think out a plan, to come up with some sort of strategy of, okay, I find people here, I get them onto an email list, and then I follow up with them. It takes work, but I guarantee you will spend way more work and get way less reward if you do not have some sort of plan of how you're trying to move people along this pathway of finding you to be a thought leader, or going to buy your product, or going to donate to your cause. You can get the next two bullets. There's also a tendency to waste money, especially if you have a business, and in the end, just you won't be effective in any way by not having some sort of plan. Next slide. So the first thing is just having an end goal. What does it mean to be a thought leader? How do you know when you have arrived? Is there some sort of, I get published in 5 articles? What is the end goal here? And what are the steps to get there? So you want to look at whatever your career goal is, whatever your business goal is, and then start building that pathway backwards of like, okay, I need to get this many people to be on an email list, or I need this many people. What is action that's going to show that you are a thought leader? What is the type of buying scenario? What kind of growth do you need to see in your business in order for you to have met your goal? And then work backwards from that. And this is really looking from that starving crowd all the way to like, how do you get them, on your email list, buying your product, supporting you for your rally, whatever you're looking for, and how to make the most out of those connections. I can't tell you how many people I've seen actually do well on social media and build up, say, an email list, or get a ton of followers on social media and then get them to buy a first little product or something, but then they never follow up with them. And so they've paid, whether in money or in time, to acquire a ton of people on an email list, but then they had no plan for what to do with them afterward. And then they just kind of fall off the face of the earth. Well, I met my goal. I got them on an email list. So, yep. Now what do I do? And then you just kind of lose all those people. Because when you don't communicate with them on a regular basis, people forget about you. Don't think too highly of yourself. Just kidding. Next slide. This next shift is really about being very practical and efficient. And I know I've used this word a couple times already during this presentation, but the key thing is if you are dealing with multiple responsibilities, unless you are as efficient as possible with social media and frankly get kind of your own reward circuit going of getting whatever your goal is happening, getting people signing up for that, showing up in articles, whatever it is, that your goal is, it's going to drop off. It's really tough to be consistent if you aren't efficient about how you do it. Next slide. So here's a couple of hacks of how to do this while being a busy person with lots of responsibility. So the first thing is just to, my apologies, we switched the presentation over from Keynote to PowerPoint in the last second, so some words are cut off here. But so the first thing is to just be a free time miner, is what I like to think of it, is that on social media, wherever you're at, if you are a LinkedIn user, then there. If you're a Facebook user and you are building your brand on Facebook, there, just follow the kinds of brands that your audience follows. So for instance, I'm right now working on a news brand that focuses on blue collar workers. And I just follow a bunch of blue collar comedians and blue collar thought leaders, if you want to think of them that way, and those sorts of audiences that my audience likes. And when I'm in line at the grocery store, I'm just looking really quick through my Facebook feed, and I just found, 3 posts that I can share along with some extra information that's from our brand voice or that helps us meet our brand goals. And I just save it on Facebook, or I'll share it then or something. And right then and there, I've filled in some content that is both meaningful to my audience and also promotes collaboration among, our the different brands that are all circling around this particular target audience. And it's that simple. And it's also probably somewhere I would have been during the grocery line trip anyway, is on Facebook, but now I made it also effective for some of the brands that I manage. Another way to do it is, another thing to add in there is just to have a very simple editorial calendar, like think through having maybe, of course, all of this just depends on what kind of brand you're trying to build. If you have a kind of motivational quote that you have, or that a particular person you like to follow that's also a thought leader and you like to grab quotes from them, you can just say like, okay, every Monday I'll have a quote. So one week you're like, oh, I have 20 quotes from these people that are all really important in this field. So the next 20 Mondays, I'll just post those quotes really quick. And you can actually schedule those out beforehand. So if you have a list of 20 quotes that you just really like to live by, you could just schedule them out on Facebook natively, on LinkedIn natively, depending on the month with LinkedIn, or you can use another kind of service to schedule them out and just kind of schedule it and forget about it, and know that you have at least one thing that's being posted every week to keep you top of mind among your experts, among your fan base. The other principle that is actually, I think, the most helpful is never be afraid to reuse, reduce, and recycle content. So if you wrote some blog post months and months ago, you can be reusing that blog post on at least an every other week basis, depending on how large your audience is. And you can be reusing it as taking a quote out of your blog and then making that a post. It can be grabbing a paragraph out of it and making it another post. It can be turning it into some kind of graphic. It can be turning it into a podcast version and then sharing the podcast. You can reuse, reduce, and recycle all of the content you've used. You can do that with all the content you shared before as well. The stuff that you shared from other thought leaders, you can be sharing their same blog post again, but maybe with another perspective on it, or another quote from it, or a new thought that you have about that particular person's opinion on such and such subject, and inviting people into another kind of conversation about the same content. But most people don't really remember that content came out 2 or 3 weeks ago, that you already shared that, because as much as we like to think it, most people are not super rabid followers of every single post that we make. Next slide. So this next one is about having integrity, and this might sound kind of silly because I would hope that all of us feel like we already have integrity. But let me give you a scenario. Next slide. If you and your friends were hanging out at a bar and somebody just walks up to you and starts to, maybe they say, "Hi, I noticed your sweater is pink. That's really cool because I'm selling a car that's pink and I bet you really like pink cars. And they just start going on this sort of tangent of trying to sell you something. That would feel really awkward, right? Well, that's basically what you're doing on social media for the most part. And you want to make sure that you don't come off that way. On social media, people are there at the watering hole. They're discussing very important cat videos. Um, they're discussing some of the news that matters, most of them. They're sharing pictures of their kids and their grandkids and their dogs and their trip to the woods, the hike, and all that sort of stuff, right? And then you're jumping in, and for those with businesses particularly, you're coming in and saying, oh, well, that relates to this, or you're interrupting their conversation of about cat videos, very important stuff, and selling them something. And so we need to be really careful about how we actually present ourselves, because even if you do have integrity, it might not look like it from the outside. As a thought leader as well, if it feels like every time you're posting you're just trying to use people to build your career, that doesn't come off very well. So basically, if people can see that you're just there to get sales or to step up in your field, they can tell. People can really tell when you're being inauthentic, and like they can feel used. So one of the first ways to actually fit in the bar scene, or the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of that, is to become a native on that platform. What I mean by that is that you need to actually spend time there. It's not, you don't just go in, make your post so that you can impose whatever your thought is, your blog post is on people, or sell your thing and then leave again. It's a place where you should be participating as well. And that might seem overwhelming, especially when people are saying you need to be a thought leader on all the platforms and all these different locations. But really, it would be much more effective for you to go deep on one platform and just say, like, LinkedIn is where I am and it's where I'm active, and you are participating in conversations there, you're creating conversations, and you get to know the subculture of LinkedIn and how people use hashtags there, and those sorts of things, and become a native in order to build that kind of community around your thought leadership or around your brand. And one of the things you see a lot of times is people will just pop into LinkedIn or pop into Facebook, and they read some article from Social Media Examiner that says that you should use hashtags. And so then they leave some sort of post that's trying to sell something, but it sounds just a little off. It's like someone who has English as a second language, but they're kind of new to it. And so it's not that they did anything wrong with that particular sentence, but there's something about the grammar that was a little off, and you kind of think, wait, this doesn't feel exactly like this person is usually here, and it just doesn't feel as natural. So it's best to just have that native voice by living there, by being part of that community. And then it's also important to act like you're talking to humans, and that might sound like a ridiculous thing to say, but realistically, a lot of brands go onto social media and they talk to people like they're a demographic rather than actual people. We've actually had one brand that I'm building. It's in the political realm, and so a lot of people disagree with what this political side is about from this particular brand. And we have discussions with people, and we give them resources to be able to take better care of themselves or their family and whatnot. And people will disagree with the viewpoint, but then we take such good care of those people above and beyond that we actually have people who have literally said, I don't agree with what this brand is about, but yes, I would like your t-shirt and I'd like to wear it around. And yes, I'm going to tell my friends about your brand. So even though they disagree with the brand itself, it's that it's so unusual to be talked to as though you're seen, and that you are an actual human being with thoughts and feelings and needs and wants and dreams, that people will actually be very into your leadership in that field, whether even if they don't agree with exactly everything you're saying. And that's really the power of having integrity and being authentic on social. Next slide. And then finally, have fun. Yes, even the thought leaders can have fun. Next slide. So one of the things is a lot of times we take each other or we take ourselves way too seriously. I've dealt with this with a lot of different brands. Right now, I'm dealing a lot in political realm, and a lot of people take themselves so seriously. It's it's difficult dealing with lawyer firms. I've been able to help lawyer firms actually have some fun and not take themselves too seriously. And then the next slide, I'll talk about a cybersecurity group that we also did that with. And it's really, even if you're a thought leader, don't be afraid to have something that's a bit simple and readable and relatable. Shorter, broken up text is just as a best practice in general is really helpful. It makes it easier to read. You can still be a thought leader without writing 3 paragraphs for every single post you ever make. Being a thought leader could mean that you can present an idea simply or have a fun discussion around a topic, even if it is, something you're being a thought leader in. You can still have a discussion about it that is a little bit lighter sometimes. And then also create curiosity. You can have kind of teasers to send people to your blog content or to another piece of content. Have some fun with it, really. And that means, across the board, I've worked with a laundromat. Try making that fun. Like that one we could make fun too, and relatable, and an interesting brand too. So if that's the case, if you are feeling like your topic is something you can't really have any joy around, feel free. I'd be happy to accept the challenge of discussing ways that we can lighten things up, because that's also something that's going to differentiate you among your peers, frankly, because if you're able to be relatable while also being a thought leader, that's something above and beyond. And one last best practice, actually, while we're on this, is that this is more particularly for not for thought leaders, but for the rest of y'all, is that you generally want to write at about half of the educational attainment level of your audience. So if you're talking about, if you're reaching people, you're specifically trying to talk to people who are, say, they graduated high school level as their highest attainment, then you want to write at about a 6th grade level. That's just the general comfort level on social media. That's where people go for comfortable reading generally on Facebook, Instagram, and depending on your field, Twitter. And so writing at a 6th grade level is what makes most sense. If you're talking to PhDs, even if you're talking outside of their expertise, you would consider them maybe 22nd grade, depending on which PhD. But anyway, so you would at the most be wanting to talk at an 11th grade level if you're talking to PhDs outside of their expertise. And so you can kind of make that calculation depending on what kind of audience you're trying to talk to and how to make sure you're relatable and fun to read on social media. Next slide. This one in particular, one of my clients was National Cyber League, and they took themselves way too seriously, because they're about cybersecurity and phishing and all of these things that are actually, like, those are really not fun topics. But we were able to shift things so that we could both reach their goals of increasing cybersecurity career awareness, of general cybersecurity best practices so that all of us could get phished less and all that kind of a thing, and also make it fun. And we actually made humor as a main piece of our strategy when we were launching a new competition season. And using that, we were actually able to, get over 2,000 players for a new season versus just 1,000 players that we were aiming to get for that year's increase. So humor actually has a tremendous value across many, many different fields, and you should not be afraid to use it. It does not make you unprofessional. It does not. I mean, obviously there's a limit. Don't go too crazy. But you can cross fields, humor, joy, if you can get that into whatever your type of thought leadership is, your brand for your business, or your nonprofit, that is going to really give you far more reach than tons of jargon even. Next slide. And that was the 5 shifts. Thank you guys all for joining us today.
Awesome, and we do have a bit of time left for Q&A, so if you haven't already sent in your questions, please do submit those to the questions box, and we'll get through a few of those in the next few minutes. So I'll start in with our first. We have one attendee, Mariah, who asks, what is the most crucial factor in choosing what social media platform to use? Is it the audience? Is it the existing network? Is it the skills at using the platform? How would you go about that?
Sure. So, there's definitely a variety of factors there. I would say the most important thing is wherever your audience is active. There's a lot of different reports that are published that tell you about what kind of demographics are most active on each platform. So I would think the main thing is to look at resources that talk about who's active on those platforms, not necessarily just who is. So for instance, on Twitter, I think the last statistic I saw was that somewhere around 85% of Twitter profiles are not actually active. So if you just looked at a resource that said who is on Twitter, you would find that everybody and their mom and their grandma is on Twitter, but this particular demographic is most active there. The other aspect is if you are, say, in the thought leader realm, then you want to know where are the other thought leaders. So that might be a little bit different than where people are most active in that particular demographic. It might just be where the particular platform fosters the type of conversations best. And that can look a lot different for a lot of different, a lot of different fields, really. And then the third factor on here is a comfort level for yourself. If for a lot of people to break into Twitter especially is just really daunting, and because Twitter is high maintenance compared to the other social media platforms. And so if you're feeling anxiety about breaking into some place for your whatever you're trying to do, whatever your goals are, I would say that it's not wrong to go with a place that you're more familiar with and that you can more immediately get the ball rolling to meet your goals. Maybe, get a Twitter account. I'm just using it as an example, but get a Twitter account and just kind of check it out so you can get more familiar with it and maybe use it down the road. But if it's going to be a barrier to moving forward, don't break into a whole new platform, even if the reports are saying that, this is the place where such and such demographic is most active. Everybody is on every platform at the end of the day. There's somebody there in every demographic and every platform.
Great. We have a couple of tools-related questions. One asking about how you go about finding or creating the appropriate hashtags for your brand, and then another question on just generally what tools would you suggest specifically for scheduling posts?
Sure. So I'll send around a document in the follow-up email with some particular links to make sure that everybody has the spellings correctly for email or the URLs and whatnot. But so for scheduling, several of these platforms have native options for scheduling. So Facebook, you can schedule out posts right on Facebook itself. And for Twitter, you can actually go into the ads manager section, and without even ever running ads, you can schedule out tweets on Twitter natively. And for Instagram, there's some companion apps you can use to do that, like Later or those sorts of things. And for all of those, you can use Hootsuite. You can have up to 3 profiles there for free on Hootsuite. So I've used that a lot in the past. And then if you're trying to do something more robust and have more platforms that you're on, then right now I'm really liking Sprout Social. Seems the most user-friendly while also going in depth and having a lot of functionality, but that one does have a price tag. So those are the couple of options. And then as far as hashtags, there are resources like Hashtagify You can search that, and then you can put hashtag ideas in there, and it will tell you about the frequency that they're used. And it also depends what platform. So if you just go on Twitter and search a hashtag, it'll tell you how many results you get, and the same with Instagram. So there's some ways you can do that natively on there. As far as creating a hashtag for your own brand, you want to aim for something obviously that other people aren't going to use flippantly unless it helps you. Sometimes it's actually helpful if some people are using a hashtag before you start to own it. But though that's just making sure it's memorable. The shorter, the better, and making sure that you get it out there beyond just your particular brand. Otherwise, it's kind of awkward if you just start using a hashtag with your own name of your business on it, but you don't have any incentive for other people to use it. It just kind of falls flat generally.
Thanks, Mariah. We have another question. What would your advice be for someone who, or for a brand that is looking to go from basically no followers to having your first couple high quality interactions?
Um, so I think so the main way to get those first high quality interactions is to actually interact with other people in your like in that client or the target audience. And I'm trying to make this general enough because on different platforms it's a bit different. But also, depending on how, depending on where you are, what type of goal you have, it might be worth it to just put $20 behind getting a post in front of the right people. If it saves you the the headache, basically, because the reality is that shift from the very beginning to getting those first meaningful interactions in sales can just be so daunting and kind of painful and just feel like you're posting things into a black hole. And so that's what makes it really difficult to get started, is getting beyond that. So don't be afraid. I mean, it's okay to put a little bit, $20 behind getting a post in front of just the right people. That it particularly works if it's like a hyper local brand that's around a zip code, or if that sort of a thing. Also, just, I mean, for a lot of brands, you can leverage just family and friends to help get it in front of more people, and just especially if you've got a lot of cousins or something like that, you can, don't be afraid to reach out and just try to use those sort of organic means to then get in front of the right people and get some meaningful interactions. Because that first phase is always very difficult to get traction, definitely. And that's across the board, whether you're an expert or not. So don't think that you're not doing the right thing if it's taking a little bit of time.
Great. And what is your opinion in terms of the importance of having a breadth of platforms, or even associations or groups within a platform, versus going deeper into one or two platforms?
So when you're establishing your brand, get a username in all the platforms, just so that you own it, so that you have some brand consistency if you do decide to break into other platforms. But it would be part of it is knowing your own bandwidth, and if you're the only chef in the kitchen doing social media, then one platform is more than enough, more than enough effort to work on. It would be much better to go very deeply on there and get some rabid fans. If you build up a fan base on Facebook, for instance, and they just really love your brand and what you have to say, transitioning to Instagram down the road, or to Twitter, or adding those platforms on, will be that much easier because you already have a fan base on, I'm just using as an example, Facebook. These people love you. Then they hear you're on Twitter, and they're going to all jump over and invite their friends and have people engage with you on Twitter too. So just because you focus on one particular platform right now, don't think that that means that that's lost traction on others, or that that means that you'll never be able to add on others. It'd be better to just do one really, really well, so much that it makes people want to follow you onto Twitter as well.
Great. I think we have time for maybe just a few more questions. we had another attendee who was interested in your suggestion about reusing content, especially because the media cycle is so rapid. But the counter to that, or the question from our attendee is, isn't old material stale? And yeah, kind of how do you overcome that concern?
Yeah, it depends. It really depends on what field you're in. Um, there's, but I would venture to say that most fields, even when content, could potentially be stale, there's still ways to reuse it. I mean, so social media itself, just of course, that would be my example, is a very fast moving, changing field. And but even you see like big names like Social Media Examiner, they reuse content all of the time. And it's sometimes it's a refresh on a particular item, but it takes you, if you have a blog post about something that happened months ago and it only takes you 10 minutes to refresh that content so that it has an update, then that's way less work than writing a whole new blog post. And also, sometimes there's still nuggets of information from that larger piece of content that are still true, or that now you have another perspective on. And so yeah, there's an element, you don't want to just keep reposting the exact same thing over and over again, but it's definitely a lot less work to just reuse a piece of older content than to write a whole new piece of content.
Great. We have another attendee who asked, you talked a lot about using humor as a strategy on social media platforms, and we have an attendee who asked, how do I develop a humor strategy without embarrassing myself?
hmm. Uh, Well, I guess I'm trying to think of how to say something that is across the board useful on that, other than like hang out with your drunk uncle. Hmm. Um, I mean, so one way you could do it is maybe it's just a matter of, sometimes what happens, I notice it just from working with academics a lot, is that, we get so deep in the academic sphere that we just kind of lose that humor bone. Like we forget we take ourselves so seriously because we're so deep into that topic or whatever. And maybe just exposing yourself to humor in general in your downtime while you're, washing the dishes, listen to dry bar comedy or something like that, just to at least like, you know, loosen yourself a little bit so that you can think about some of these things a step back. Because sometimes when you're just so deep in the content, it's hard to think about it. Or if, especially if it's like even if it's a social welfare kind of issue or something, those topics are really tough. You can't joke about starving children. Like that's never going to work, right? But there's definitely ways that you can bring humor to lighten a difficult thing. So obviously, you would never joke. I'm just using this terrible example. I'm sorry. That's just the first thing that occurred to my brain. But you would never joke about starving children, but you could joke about the issues that you can basically make fun of people that make the issues that make starving children. Like, oh yeah, this government thing. Of course, I'm thinking government things. I'm in so much trouble right now. But so like, this government thing thinks it's solving this, but it's not. So it's a terrible humor, but it also brings truth to the subject matter, and while bringing a little bit of the humor part, while also advancing the narrative that you want people to be listening to. I hope that made sense. I was trying to find a sensitive subject that wouldn't offend every single person here.
Yeah, and I think you also shared, didn't you, Mariah, that you listen to like humor, like comedy podcasts and things on occasion too, as like possibly a way to develop that sensibility as well.
Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, any issue that's worth fighting for, or any thought leadership type thing that you're in, there's probably someone that's a little on the periphery that maybe you don't agree with what they think, or maybe they don't have the best logic behind why they say the things they do, but they're still helpful to expose yourself to just think about things a little more creatively, to look at things from a different angle. And that's really what can help you, again, position yourself as a thought leader, as somebody who has something different to say than just like, here is my straight jargon post. How much jargon can I fit in this post to show that I'm a thought leader? But coming at it from this angle that makes it enjoyable to consume the content beyond just making you think hard.
Great. Well, I think we have time for one more question, so we'll end with this one. We have an attendee who asked, how do you interact with high-profile followers on social media? Any advice about that?
High profile. Um, I guess there's so many directions that could go, because this could be high profile person that's in line with your brand. It could be, I'm not sure if does it seem like that's an influencer question, or like connecting with influencers. I'm not sure.
I would guess that it's an influencer question.
Okay.
If the attendee can send any clarification on that question, please feel free to do that. But I'm going to assume that's
Okay.
an influential person, interacting with them on social
Okay,
media.
so different influencers have different rules of engagement, and sometimes you just kind of have to contact them through Messenger or DM and see what you can find out. Or if they're like a very high profile, they probably have their own website that has kind of the rules of engagement if you want to have them collaborate with you or to endorse something of yours or something like that. And a lot of it is like exchanging influence for influence. Sometimes it's paying somebody to help that brand, or it's maybe just convincing them that your cause is so important and that they should really be behind it, and then hoping that they'll be interested. So there's a lot of different ways through it, and a lot of different influencers just they each have their own rules kind of what they're looking for. And so that's why it's a little hard to say, because different influencers have different motivations for collaborating or sharing or any of those things.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mariah, for sharing your expertise on this important topic. Thank you to all of our attendees. I want to let everyone know that we're now in our final week of Career Month programming, so I hope that you can join us tomorrow and throughout the week. Tomorrow we'll have a webinar again at noon Central on workforce reentry and career transitions. And you can visit our events page at careers.uchicagoalumni.org for a list of our most upcoming programs. Thank you again, Mariah. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.